And then you've got a slew of English language philosophers: Berkeley, Hume, in France, Voltaire, at the same time, Pierre Bayle, also in France, and much of that time. Then you've got Immanuel Kant is huge in his own time. There are other figures who are also quite significant figures around that time: Herder, Hamann, Jacobi. And then after that, you've got the German idealists: Fichte, Schelling, Hegel. You've got German romantics, the two Schlegels, Friedrich and Wilhelm Schlegel. You've got two Humboldts, Wilhelm von Humboldt, Alexander von Humboldt. You've got Novalis, Hölderlin, other kind of things. You've got Schopenhauer, who's kind of wild card. He's his own little tradition. And the French and Germans before Kant would call themselves rationalists. That's a school of philosophy. The English language folk would call themselves empiricists, apart from Berkeley, who'd call himself an idealist. Kant called himself a transcendental idealist. Fichte, Schelling, Hegel, German idealists, German romantics. And then as you go into the 19th century later on, you have figures like Kierkegaard in Copenhagen, writing in Danish. Friedrich Nietzsche in Germany, writing in German. And in the 20th century, who knows? There's a lot of figures, and you need to understand a little bit about where these folks sit. So I bought some show and tell. These are in the library. So this is, you can take photographs of the covers if you want. Around. An Introduction to German Philosophy by Andrew Bowie. Very good introduction to these things.
This is the one that's online, isn't it?
Maybe. If I manage to track that online, that'll be amazing. It's a Quality Press, so they don't tend to be online. But maybe.
I thought it was the one you put the link to. Maybe not.
The thing can go very short.
It's very different.
Oh, okay. Just the same person.
It's a slightly heftier thing. This is historically oriented. So I've linked to that online. That's fine. This is, I think, a CUP book. No, Harvard University Press book. So I don't know whether they have an online presence. That's a more historically rich account of the kinds of debates which are going on in our period. And this is a bit of a fanboy commentary on Kant's critique of pure reason, which I have used with great success in previous classes. Things I think are interesting. So yeah, take photographs. Are interested in the question, what is philosophy? And their answer to that question is very often a set of proposals. And because of the way that education and the history of philosophy works, you tend to read those philosophers who reconfigure philosophy. So Descartes tried to reconfigure philosophy, Leibniz tried to reconfigure philosophy, David Hume tried to reconfigure philosophy, Immanuel Kant tried to reconfigure philosophy, Hegel, and so forth. But in order to know what they're doing, you need to know what was it like before? What is the difference? Here's philosophy before they do their work, and here's how philosophy looks after they've done their work, and how do I find that out? Now, if you'd been studying 50 years ago, it'd be very hard. You'd have to read the primary works of the main philosophers and draw your own conclusions. But that is not the state of play now. Now there are very, very good introductions to German philosophy, which can guide you. So Andrew Bowie's German Philosophy, a very short introduction, is good. It contains a much wider time period than we are looking at. But the chapters on the earlier period are very good. is a nice uppercut. What's your name?
Ali.
Ali.
Yes.
Ali, welcome. I was sending some books around for people to look at and photograph
Oh, okay.
before they come back.
This is all we need to read in the Zoom.
These are things which you can use
Okay.
to fill the gaps. So we played a game, Ali, which was name any philosophers.
Yes.
And it wasn't a huge success. And that's helpful for me to know, because if I assume you all know the works of Leibniz, that's not very helpful if you don't know even who Leibniz is. So it helps me gauge kind of the level we are heading for. We also were thinking about styles of philosophy, different schools of philosophy that there are in Europe. And so far we've had rationalists, empiricists, idealists. We've had romantics. If you head on to the 20th century, things start to get very confusing. You want to know what the leading school of American philosophy was around the turn of the end of the 19th, beginning of the 20th centuries? Pragmatism. What would Heidegger be called? Anyone know? What school of philosophy? Phenomenology would be called. The big one, which is if you went asking our philosophers in this faculty what philosophy they knew, my joke was they'd say, oh, I just do philosophy. But which school of philosophy is it? It is analytic philosophy. And the first question I asked was, what is continental philosophy being contrasted with? It's being contrasted with analytic philosophy. So if you do philosophy of religion, you're very likely to encounter a lot of analytic philosophy of religion. And continental philosophy is in contrast to that. It just means you're reading stuff that's not in English, really. A mixture of German and French figures. But there is quite a developed Italian philosophical scene. There was at one time quite a developed Spanish philosophical scene before the Spanish economy tanked. Philosophy is very expensive. You need quite a thriving economy to support philosophy. And so forth. Okay.
So can I just ask, so these are all German philosophy, is that our main focus, or is it?
So the next 4 weeks, we're doing 2 weeks of Immanuel Kant and 2 weeks of Hegel.
Okay.
And I hand off to the next person. So you get a full week.
Okay.
Now, philosophy of religion, you should read encyclopedia articles on philosophy of religion, I think. So by next week, please just find one. I mean, find a bunch of them and then decide which one to read. And then be prepared to give a 3-minute report.
Sorry, Simon.
An encyclopedia article on philosophy of religion. Just be prepared to come and talk about it. I read this. Here's some of the highlights. So imagine yourself a tour guide in a city. You're going to tour guide about philosophy of religion. That would be a very useful thing to be able to do. Because if people ask you, what are you studying? And you say, I'm studying continental philosophy of religion. And someone says, oh, what's philosophy of religion? You can say, it's this. So come with a semi-fluent account from an encyclopedia article. Is that doable?
Yeah.
It's also fun and informative. And it will fill you with confidence. I feel you need confidence. So I'm getting a bit of a confidence deficit. So my job is for you to feel confident about what you're doing. So that by the time we finish in 4 weeks, you feel absolutely fantastic about yourselves and think, oh, I know all this stuff. But you're busy people, and you need to have targeted reading, and I will guide you with things for you. Here's how I'm going to take you through this, here's how I'm going to take you through this, and so forth, so that you are not wasting time. Okay.
Sorry, can I just ask again,
Yes,
so these 4 books, are we supposed to just read through them, or are you just...
There's no way you can read through all of those 4 books. They're books for you to be aware of,
Okay.
so that when if you're thinking about writing about any of the topics that come under these next 4 weeks, you're not left wondering, what can I possibly look at?
Okay.
These 4 books are interesting because they have such good bibliographies. So they'll guide you to other things. And they're clearly written, they're written by reputable, well-informed figures. I'm not going to assume you know anything about continental philosophy of religion, because if you did, why would you do this module? But I am hoping that you are interested in philosophy in general. So which master's programs are you all doing? Let's just go around and do this. Which masters are you doing?
Islamic studies.
Islamic studies,
PRE.
PRE, or are you doing FRE?
Quran sciences, Quranic studies.
We have a master's in Quranic studies. That's amazing. I didn't know we had one of those. Do we really? We have a master's in Quranic studies.
Islamic studies, I think.
Oh, Islamic studies.
Islamic studies.
Yes, we have one of those. Yeah, okay, good. Yeah.
Yeah, same Islamic studies.
Islamic studies.
And my major, comparative literature.
Your major. So which program are you on? When you were applying to the University of Birmingham, you said, I want to study this program. What did you say?
That was in the. Sorry, I didn't catch.
So we have different master's programs. So we've got Islamic studies, we've got philosophy, religion, and ethics. When you applied to the university, you would have said, I want to do this program in Birmingham. I'm just curious to know which program you're studying on. You don't know which program you're studying on.
Sorry, sorry.
That's okay. We ought to figure that out, though. I'll help you do
It
that.
normally says on the student card, do you have your student card?
I haven't had
Oh,
this
you haven't?
student.
Okay.
Okay, good. So that's task number one, is to read an article on philosophy of religion. And one of the things to look out for is, does continental philosophy of religion show up in this article? Curious to know. If it doesn't matter. You're just giving a short 3-minute presentation. And there's only 5 of you, so that shouldn't take very long. Okay? Okay. So the philosophy of religion, the kinds of questions that get asked in it have changed since the philosophy of religion became a big topic in the 1970s. So the discipline itself is, 60-ish years old. If you went asking about philosophy of religion before that, people would know what you meant, but they wouldn't think that it was a discipline in philosophy. They would just think it's something which some philosophers do. Whereas now it's definitely its own subdiscipline. But the kinds of questions that get asked in philosophy of religion are very odd compared with the kind of questions that get asked in theology. Now, some theologians are philosophers of religion, and some philosophers of religion are theologians. And I know what you're going to be wondering now is, what is the difference between theology and philosophy of religion? Am I right? I think you're interested to know what the answer to that question is. And the answer is, very tricky to draw a very hard and fast demarcation in the earlier period, much easier now because of professionalized specializations. But the kinds of things that you might expect a philosopher of religion to ask are, can God's existence be proved? Is there a problem of evil? Those are the two massive ones. And then sometimes questions around what are miracles? What is religious belief? How do people come to believe things or not believe things? And so forth. Those are kind of philosophy of religion questions. They're questions which theologians are not really very interested in, which is why they've grown up into their own subdiscipline. Now, in continental philosophy of religion, these questions are much less asked. So the questions that Kant is going to ask, for example, is what is the relationship between thinking and being? Or that's to say, when we think, what are we thinking about? And when we look out into the world, which is a world of things that exist, how do we think about it? So if you think about your everyday negotiation of the world, you're thinking about things all the time. And Kant is interested in the question, well, why do I think about them like that? And he's very interested in what looks like a very radical difference of opinion between certain kinds of rationalists who say our thoughts operate with a degree of independence of the world, but they map onto the world. So we have ideas. If you look out the window here or out the window there, what do you see? What do you see if you look out the window? What do you see? What do you see? Okay, trees, but they're differentiated, aren't they? Like, do you see one tree? How do you know there's more than one tree? What do you see out of that window?
Just all
A wall. And what's the wall made up of?
bricks.
Okay, and you know that there are individual bricks.
Yeah.
But how do you know that? It's just one wall. How do you know they're individual? How do you know there's more than one tree? Because you have ideas of things like bricks and things like trees. Well, how do you come by those ideas? How do you get them? Philosophy is partly devoted to this question of how do we come by our ideas. And once you have them, how do they operate? So you see one thing, a wall, but after you think about it for a while, you say, oh no, it's made up of parts. But how do you know which are the parts? You must have an idea of parts now. Ooh, you had an idea of bricks. That's one kind of idea. And now you have the idea of parts. Sort of like bricks. But the idea of parts, if I said go out into the world and find parts, you'd say, I can find trees and bricks. But I already have the idea of parts. I'm not sure I can go into the world and find that idea. How interesting. And parts make up wholes. That always happens when I say the word wholes. Wholes and parts. How do we come to think of these terms? There's something about the structure of thinking which divides the world into wholes and parts. And wholes and parts are related to walls and bricks, or trees and leaves, or trees and trees. But how they're related is a very interesting question. So rationalists think that we have this kind of apparatus. It's part of how we think, it's kind of innate, and it maps quite nicely onto the world. Empiricists, by contrast, very important those two words, by contrast, say no. We come to our ideas by experiencing things in the world. We encounter trees, we encounter bricks, we say, well, what's that? And someone says, well, they're free. It's a tree. Yeah, okay, now I know what trees are. What's that? Those are bricks. I mean, bricks. I know what bricks are. But if someone says, bricks are parts of the holes that are walls, you say, I have holes and parts. But no one ever told you what a hole and what a part is, whereas someone did tell you what a tree was. Because when you were small, someone might have asked you to draw a picture of a tree. Or someone might have asked you to draw a picture of a house. So you draw them. But no one ever said, draw me a picture of a hole with parts. We come by that distinction differently. So that was very interesting in this question. Who's right? The empiricists who say we come by our ideas from experience. But now parts and wholes, do we come by those ideas by experience? Very interesting. Do we? Numbers? How do we get those? Or there's a whole philosophy branch devoted to how we come by our ideas of numbers. So the rationalists and the empiricists are divided over how we get our ideas. Do we get them from experience, or are they already there, and they then map onto experience? And Immanuel Kant is one of the first philosophers to say, how interesting that we have these opposing schools of thinking. I don't think we can just choose one of them. It seems that we have a very, very sophisticated mental set of operations and categories that we use to make sense of the world, including parts and wholes. One of the things that you'll be very used to from writing essays when you were younger is you're good at spotting things that are similar and things that are different. That's really interesting. How does similarity and difference work? What does it mean to say something is the same as something else or something is different from something else? These don't seem very empirical questions. On the other hand, there are trees and bricks and other objects in the world, and it makes very little sense, kind of things, to say, we just have ideas of trees. Yeah, we have ideas of trees because we've seen them, and we can then give an idea to them. And the philosopher Leibniz, who was writing at the end of the 1600s, early 1700s, had a proof for his rationalism, and it's absolutely brilliant proof. Would you like to hear it? It's very simple. So we're looking for something which will disprove empiricism as the only source of ideas, but which will make sense of the way in which we see the world. So Leibniz had a very, very interesting proof that empiricism is key to how we think, even though he himself would class himself as a rationalist. And that is, he says, we have an idea of the colour blue. Do you agree? So he had a little test for this, which is the test of an idea is whether you can give a clear account of it, so that someone else will understand what you're talking about. So, if I were to give you an account of a knife, I would say a knife is an object made of a very hard material, usually metal, but it can be something else. This object has edges, and one of the edges is extremely narrow, so narrow that when it encounters other objects, it can separate them, because the pressure that it applies is absolutely massive. Pressure is force over area. So if you make the area very small, the force is huge. So my hand has got an area of, I don't know what you say, 6 by 4 inches, 10 inches, so 24 inches squared. Can't cut the table because the area is big. Even if the force is very big, force over area, a knife, very small area, massive force. I can probably cut a table with a very sharp knife, and with a saw, which is made of very, very small things, I can do an even better job. So if you know about force and area and hardness of metals and so forth, I can give you an idea of a knife. If I showed you a knife, having given you that description, you might say, oh, that conforms to what you're describing. It's metallic, one of the edges is very sharp, I can see someone using it. So the idea of a knife matches up with a knife. And Leibniz says, okay, great, do that with the colour blue. Tell me your concept of the colour blue. Who'd like to have a go?
I mean, it's just a colour, isn't it?
It is just a colour, yes. So what's the concept of it?
It's like other colours will contrast differently to other
So
colours.
how would you give an account of it so that if someone saw it, they'd say, okay, that's blue.
The sea.
Ah, now that's very interesting. You have to refer to another object. So not its properties. You're not giving me an account of the properties of the colour blue, you're just saying, well, that's what the sea is sometimes blue. Okay? What about the properties of the colour blue? I tried to give you the properties of a knife. What about the properties of the colour blue? Can you do it? Well, I'll save you some hassle and some anxiety. No, you can't. You cannot describe the qualities of the colour blue in such a way that if someone saw it, they would recognise it. You have to show them something blue. Say that colour is blue. And after that, you can deploy this. But I'm not telling you its properties, because it's brute and it's that. Wittgenstein gave a very typical similar lecture in part of his philosophical investigations when he says, what are the properties of the smell of coffee? You can't do it. You have to smell it. And then, that's either it's good or it's bad. But after that, you can tell the smell of coffee. But you can't give an account of it. So Leibniz's proof of the importance of experience is that certain things you cannot give a rational explanation or an account of them. You can't give an account of their properties. You can only show them. And this is where one of the important distinctions of philosophy between showing and telling starts to show. So Kant's very interested in this question. Some things come only from experience, like the colour blue. But some things come from the mind, like the idea of sameness and difference. If I asked you to find sameness and difference in the world, you'd say, I can't go looking for sameness and difference in the world. Sameness and difference are properties of my thinking. I'm able to say that things are the same or that they're different, but the world doesn't give me those. And so Kant is the first person in his philosophy to say, ladies and gentlemen, I think we need to give up on the choice between rationalism and empiricism. We have to say that some things are given in experience, and some things are given in the mind, and that judgments we make are a combination of thinking and sense, or ideas and things, or as I said at the beginning, thinking and being. So Kant is an and person, concepts and experience. We get some of our concepts from experience, like trees, and some concepts we don't get from experience, like sameness and difference, parts and wholes. Okay, any questions about that? So he's trying to repair philosophy. He sees a big wound, a big gash in philosophy between empiricists who try to say, it's basically experience, and rationalists who say, it's basically thinking. He says, no, you've both understood something important, but you're confronted with a false choice. And I'm going to offer you a philosophy which you don't have to make that false choice. And I shall call it transcendental ideas. Now, no publisher these days would let you do that. They say, no, you can't call your philosophy transcendental ideas. And now I'm going to read it. It's a ridiculous term. You need to call it something sexier and fun. But Kant lived in a time when no one was sexy or fun. And so they called it transcendental ideas. And most studies of Kant are studies of trying to wonder how does he combine these two things? How do you have the and of what belongs to the mind and what belongs to experience? And the transcendental analytic, which is the first part of the Critique of Pure Reason. Critique of Pure Reason was first published in 1781, second edition a few years later. And they're both very significant versions. So in most critical editions of Kant's philosophy, you will have the A version, which is the first edition, and the B version, which is the second edition, and they both contain important insights. And the A edition is considered so important as to be preserved and distinguished from the B version. So you'll often see A and B as references to this book. That's all they're references to. First edition, second edition. Okay. Now, so the first part, I'm going to talk you through the structure of the Critique of Pure Reason, trying to give you the sense that what we're after is this, what belongs to the mind and what belongs to experience. And of course, everything in experience is in the mind. We're not able to think anywhere else. But certain things seem to come to us from experience, and certain things come from us, from our thinking, which we impose on the world. So, for example, Let's take an example of racism. It's a good example of kind of epistemology in action. If you are only familiar with people from your own ethnic background, and if you are of the belief that your own ethnic background is the superior ethnic background, which was very common in Britain up until the Second World War, then if you meet people who are not from your ethnic background, you're unable to distinguish that. Because your capacity and your ability to distinguish different faces and the morphology of different faces is very skewed to your own ethnic culture. And very often you'll meet politicians in the news who suffer from this, because they'll confuse someone with someone else. And particularly in philosophy, when the politicians are trying to be hip and trendy, they'll refer to someone and they'll get them confused with someone else, because they absolutely have no way of differentiating between them.